thank you so much for coming out and giving testimony today. I'm going to say something to spark some of your interest, but first I want to say that, my initial perceptions of the MIAC report was that it almost read as though it was something that was hurriedly put together to meet some requirements of some contractual agreement or whatever between a couple of agencies, and it really wasn't what I thought was much in the way of a significant source of information to prevent or identify the threats of terrorism in the state of Missouri. And I really haven't had a general fear of the document or that level of concern, that type of concern about this activity until you made a statement that just about scared the pants off of me when you said that the Patriot Act, which reads about the thickness of an average phone book, is one that probably very few people have ever read, but you have read, and you are completely comfortable with, and that people should have absolutely no fear of whatsoever. And that, my good friend, concerns me greatly. And let me explain myself. Sure. I don't do too much anymore, but I have spent the better part of my professional career playing with levels of amounts of electricity that you probably, and maybe not so much you, but that people would never even dream of ever even coming close to, and yet I handle a lot. And I do it safely, I do it correctly, I have lived to be this lovely old age that I am, and I will tell you, because I've been working with electricity my entire life, that it's a wonderful thing. You should have no fear of it. But I'm telling you, if you're not a trained professional, you better stay away from it. My concern is, when I hear a statement like what you made, is that our founding fathers, one of the first instincts they wanted to instill in the citizenry is do not trust your government. You have to be in control, not only of the government, but of the information that government handles. And that's my concern. I may not have read the Patriot Act, and I probably never will. But I will always have, even if it's just ingrained in the back of my mind, because I'm an American, because this is what my founding fathers told me to this is a concern they told me to have. They warned me of. And this isn't something that they just thought of in a meeting like this one afternoon, but this is hundreds and hundreds of years of a society growing to what we are today. And the warning was, don't trust an amassing of power, or in this case, an amassing of information. And I have a real concern about the amassing of this information, soon to be, I'm concerned, at a national level, of potentially non-criminal behavior, but suspicious activity. So help me understand. And previous testimony validated it for me, even though I'm not sure the person knew they were convincing me of this. But you don't have to be convicted of anything to be in one of these databases. You don't have to be convicted of anything to consider someone who is being demonstrating suspicious behavior. But you can be anyone and anybody and be in one of these databases, and you yourself don't even have access to this information, even if you've never been convicted of a crime. Tell me why I shouldn't be afraid of something like that.
Well, first off, I'll say I'm with you on the healthy suspicion of government and a healthy suspicion of the command.
And I'm not trying to be so critical of you, but no, we fall into these traps as professionals.
But also, I think you recognize the fact that you, for example, haven't read the Patriot Act or haven't at least sat down with me at some point to have me explain it to you.
Right.
With my paperwork in front of me, because I've been away from it for a while. But once you understand how it works, it's much less threatening than the press presented it.
Well, I'm not really so much concerned about the Patriot Act as much as I am on amassing of information of suspicious behavior.
Correct. And
there are other nations and there are other societies that have done this in the past, and they were not people that we look back on fondly as we reflect on history.
I'm with you on that too. And you have to remember that information is being collected. If there were no government, no law enforcement, information is being collected all the time by private industry.
Right.
When you go to Walmart, run your credit card through, or whatever, information is amassed all the time. And there are no effective checks on most of private industry in terms of what they do with the information. There are some, but nothing huge. Whereas with government, at least, we have the ability to put in control and accountability and oversight boards and things like that to have privacy laws in place. So we're really better off making sure that, to the extent information is collected under government aegis, and therefore we can have some checks and use it wisely. So that's one thing you need to remember. The fact of the matter is that when 9/11 happened, whole new terminology came up, new to me, I should say, and we call pre-incident indicators. People who have studied terrorism, not just since 9/11, but for decades before that, have identified what are called pre-incident indicators, most of which are innocent things. For example, is a person an engineer, a lawyer, or this or that, maybe an occupation, maybe where they live, maybe what they studied, what their family's involved in, all kinds of innocent things. But if you put together enough pre-incident indicators in a matrix, it tends to indicate these persons are at least prone, from history, from comparing what people have done in the past, we think they might fall in the group that could engage in either criminal or terrorist activity. So it's not just terrorist activity, it's criminal activity, same thing.
Right.
You look at these indicators. They're called clues. And the pre-incident indicators, I guess, is a fancier title for them. This kind of thing happens out if there is a set or a subset of pre-incident indicators that the government, whether this panel, the federal, or anyone else, thinks is off limits. You're free to make a law and say, don't keep records on that. But the fact that there's those, generally those kind of records are kept incidentally. It's not because someone's tracking your behavior. We all get driver's licenses. People get passports. You buy airline tickets, and the airline keeps track of where you're going, how you pay. Did you pay in cash? Did you pay in credit card? Little things like that. And by the study of a variety of information, certain things pop out as pre-incident indicators, which again, by themselves, mean nothing. They're entirely innocent. Apart from terrorism, again, you're just looking, for example, I spent many years as a major drug prosecutor in the 80s and 90s. And all the time we would cite in our conspiracy documents things that were legal in themselves, but they further, we call them overt acts, they further the object of the conspiracy. So if you do something with good motive or you do the same act with bad motive, that makes a difference. But police can't tell all the time in advance, but by linking information together, they can get a clue. And by getting a clue and another clue and another clue, and linking that together, they can make an educated judgment. As I said, well, maybe I didn't say it. Intelligence is not a science, it's more of an art. At some point, we rely on our officials in police departments, just like we rely on legislators, to use their best judgment. Does that mean they're going to be right every time? No.
Well, and I understand that, but the problem I have is when all of that intel, when all of those indicators and linkages are made, and then attached, hopefully at some point, to an individual. To me, that is a serious problem, and I'll tell you why. Again, back to my analogy of your profession versus my profession, I have been cited on occasions for leaving a safety device off, leaving a piece of, leaving it. I left this cover off, and so they said, well, that's unsafe. I said, oh, don't worry, it's not unsafe. Just stay back. Everyone knows, right? Well, no, not everyone knows, and yes, it was unsafe. And there's a reason those safeties are there. There's a reason there's covers on these boxes. There's a reason that things are done a certain way. And again, I have a concern that I've already heard testimony that we are gathering information about people, about individuals. We're not developing profiles and looking for the lights to go off as certain things happen, but we're actually at times connecting those lights, whether they've gone off or not, to an individual. Now, answer this question for me. What happens when a behavior is documented and attached to an individual that's a lie?
That's your question.
Yes.
Once it's found out to be a lie, typically, because I don't work in the MIAC setting,
if the only person who knows the truth has no access to the lie, they don't know it exists. So what happens when, and he's not in the room, he or she doesn't exist in the state today, and maybe not even in the nation, but what happens when the crooked cop who's out to get somebody says, I know how to hurt you. I'm going to start feeding information into my database, and you're going to get profiled.
The same thing happens in that situation whenever there's a crooked cop who wants to do anything, whether it's feed information in the database, or swear out a phony search warrant, or testify falsely in a trial against someone, which luckily it